In this video, I'm recreating the most famous paintings entirely in Minecraft, starting with the standard bear at $200 million, and this is just the cheapest one in the video. Some of the ones later on are upwards of over $1 billion. Before we work on the first painting, let me explain the process I'm going to use to make these builds. This method is separated into 3 main steps: basic shapes, detailing, and finally, the polishing phase. To begin, I worked on the basic shapes, then slowly started refining them. While doing this, I meticulously studied this painting, because if I mess up the base, I'll run into some major problems later on. But something quite interesting about this painting, the artist, Rembrandt, intended as a self-portrait. But, I tell you what, I'm no genius, but one has a big difference. And when I say big, I mean big. Anyways, Rembrandt's motivation for making the painting was actually to make fun of the war in Spain with the Netherlands. But I don't know if the Dutch got the joke, because they now idolize the painting and see it as the face of the battle. It has actually become the most famous painting in the Netherlands. Now continuing on with the build, the basic shapes are now done, so it's now on to the detailing phase. To begin, I worked on the coloring, trying to recreate that worn down painting look you see in some of the older Renaissance era paintings. Once I got the basic colors down, I started smoothing and blending the colors together, trying to make it feel more natural. I was also trying my best to fix his face because the likeness was not matching up. It just did not look like the person in the painting, which I hope to fix with the more complex coloring. Most people don't realize how many colors are actually put into some of these paintings. You would expect it to be very simple coloring with just basic shading, which yes, that works, but if you take a closer look at skin tones, there are several layers of colors, including reds, oranges, and even blues. Now all the skin coloring is done, I actually have to make his clothes, because I don't think anyone wants to see that. Anyways, I started with working on the hat, also working on the hair. This hat was really interesting to make because of all the crazy shapes with it, and it was really unlike anything I've really made before. So it was a nice change of pace. Honestly, this whole stage of making the clothes was really fun to work on. Just making some of these exaggerated clothes was a breath of fresh air for me, because the last few builds I worked on, the clothing stage was honestly very repetitive. Just making all these belts, buckles, feathers, and other parts were just so interesting because most modern clothes don't really have all of these accessories. But then I worked on the vast majority of his clothes, which I began with using the Archeon Loft tool to create all the flowing shapes. Then I applied some colors to it. Afterwards, I added all the highlights, shadows, trying to replicate that original painting look to a T. All that was left were the finishing touches, including smoothing out some of the colors, the cloth draping over him, and finally, the last little details. And with that, the first painting is complete. Now I was on to the second painting, and I wanted to make something a little bit more ambitious this time around, making a much more recognizable painting you've probably seen before, the girl with the pearl earrings. Just like the first painting, I started with the basic shapes, but I knew this painting was going to be much harder than the first because this painting is so iconic, and if I mess up a single detail, everything is going to be skewed. And this is why I struggled for a while making the shapes. And remember when I said this? While doing this, I meticulously studied this painting, because if I mess up the base, I'll run into some major problems later on. Yeah, unbeknownst to me, I continued with the build, trying my best to get it looking right, but slowly but surely I began to realize my mistake. But while I suffer and fix this painting, let's go over some of the history behind this painting, and maybe good old Johannes can give me some wisdom to fix this horror. Girl with the Pearl Earrings, also known as the Mona Lisa of the North, was painted in 1665 in the Netherlands by Johannes Vermeer. It was an icon of its time and remains one today. This painting is shrouded in mystery as much of its history has been lost over time. However, several theories attempt to explain its meaning. To understand these theories, let me set the scene. During this period, the Netherlands was experiencing a rise in the middle class, and one man secluded from it all watched as these events took place. This man was Johannes Vermeer. Many sources suggest that this painting represents the social shift, as the woman's attire reflects the middle class clothing, while the pearl earring symbolizes a glimpse of the future wealth the middle class would eventually gain. But again, that's just a theory. No, we are not doing a game theory bit. Anyways, back to the build. I'm now just finishing up the coloring, but now it is time for probably my favorite part about making these types of builds: the eyes. What is so cool about making these is how much detail you can actually cram into the eyes, with using blocks you would never even think of, like flowers, buttons, levers, and plenty of other things to smooth and add color. But with the eyes done and the head shape looking good, I thought I was all done with struggling, so I began working on the lips, and I thought I was looking pretty good, until I took a step back. But I did do a little more work on the lips, trying to get them looking correct, which I was eventually able to do, and now mostly I would just clean up some of the shaping on the head, adding a little bit more detail, but for some reason the lips were still not looking quite right, so I employed a technique where I took a screenshot of the build and then overlaid it with a picture of the actual painting to see where it needed to be fixed. Which after this, the build really transformed and it actually started looking like the painting. With all that done, I worked on her headdress, working on recreating all the colors, which took a little bit of trial and error, which I was eventually able to recreate properly, and after that, I had to make the cloth on top of her headpiece. Then afterward, I worked on the clothes, making sure all the colors and shapes were accurate to the original painting, which actually was a lot harder than I thought. But once that was all done, there was only one last thing to do. The pearl earring. And with that done, I have fully recreated the girl with the pearl earring in Minecraft. Now I had to figure out what I was going to make for the last painting, which I could cop out and make the Mona Lisa, but everyone is going to expect that. So I decided to make a slightly less famous painting that I think everyone has seen before, The Son of a Man by Rene Magritte. I started with a long rectangle and added the head and his shoulder on top of it, and then started chiseling out the body from the block, almost like a real sculpture. Once that was done, I began working on his face, but a slight problem arose. How the fuck am I going to build his face? So, something interesting about this painting, when the artist made it, he intended it as a self-portrait, so all I had to do was take a look at his actual face and translate it onto my recreation. And that solves our face issue. So I tried recreating the face the best I could using everything I know about how the facial structure works. But I had to alter his face slightly because when I put the apple in front of it, parts of his face were inaccurate to where they would be on the original painting. But I eventually fixed it and then began working on the apple. To begin, I started with the general shape of the apple using just a normal sphere. While I worked on the apple, I decided to also work on his hat to get a general idea of what the composition is going to be looking like. Then I started working on his collar, and then after that I began coloring the apple, making sure to use complex coloring to break up the otherwise boring composition of the painting itself. But I think if I use very intricate coloring, I can level up this painting to a higher degree, which I continue the coloring on the face and the rest of the body. But before we can do that, I actually had to finish the apple, so I continued the coloring and smoothing, making sure to take my time with it, and ended up with something I'm very proud of. But obviously, I had to make the apple look like an apple, not just a very nicely colored sphere. So I spent some time shaping it, and of course I added the stem, which I would later add the leaves. Then I started with the skin tones, which I started with the base color of honeycomb, and for the darker shades I used brown tones, including brown concrete powder. Once that was all set, I had to finish up the clothes, so I just replaced the honeycomb below his collar. Then I started working on the face, fixing any blemishes. Then I worked on the leaves of the apple, which I decided to use Archeon's Loft tool again to make all these, and I later added the texture. Speaking of texture, the clothes are looking very bland, so let's finish up the texturing around the clothes. I start with very exaggerated colors, then fill the gap between them by using colors in between those colors. Which, once that was all done, we were almost finished with this painting, and all that was left was finishing up the hat and then finishing the leaves on the apple. And with all that being said, the final painting of this project is final, complete. And with that, I have recreated 3 of the most famous paintings in Minecraft. If you want to see this again, or you want to see other projects like this, make sure to like and subscribe. Thank you for watching, and bye-bye now.